The water, Rawak Kadash. The water, Kai. Thank you, Holy Spirit. All praises to Ahaya Kised. That's all praises to Anokised. That's all praises to the great I Am, loving kindness. Bahashim Yeshaya. Bahashim Motza, the Lamb. In the name of the Messiah, the Hamashiach. Shalom, family. This is little son Sabal Nabaya. Family, I have been sitting on this lesson for quite a while, but I just haven't had time to actually record it, just because work during this last month has been crazy for me. And there hasn't been a whole lot of time for me to actually sit down and record. You know, Holy Spirit gives me something, I just write it down, and that's all that I can do. But I had a little time last night. So I spent last night getting everything in order, and I'm spending right now recording this lesson. So forgive me for the lack of high quality lessons coming out, but let's go ahead and do this right now. Family, today we are going into the understanding of the Nephilim in full. In full. I say in full because I watched a lot of different things having to do with the Nephilim back in the day, and I've read things here and I've studied things there. And to be quite honest with you, I have found out that most people only have a piece of the puzzle. But today we're going to add multiple pieces. I'm not so what's the word? I don't know the word I'm looking for, but I'm not about to sit up here and say, this is it. This is the end all, meet all, right? I'm not gonna say that. As a matter of fact, even within the information that I'm going to present to you, there is information that I'm leaving out. Not because I'm trying to hide anything, but just because, number one, that'll be incentive for people listening to this video to open up a book and read themselves. And number two, because this is going to be a long one. With everything that I have included, it's simply going to be a long one. So, with that said, let's go ahead and hop right into it. We're going to start in the Book of Enoch. Not the Book of Remembrance of Enoch. We're going to start with simply the Book of Enoch. So get out your Book of Enoch. I'm going into the R.H. Charles version. That is my preferred version to go into. I actually have a version that I thought would have worked better for this lesson. But you know what? It's in storage, and I didn't want to go and have to open up the storage building to get it out and look for it and all those different things. So you're going to have to settle for this version. But the version that I think would work better for this is actually the J.T. Millick version, which is very hard to come by, very hard to get. And even the copy that I have is a photocopied copy that is put into a big binder, which is why I put it in storage for the time being, because right now it's just a little bit too cumbersome for me to have with us right now. But anyway, we're going to use the R.H. Charles version, and we're going to go straight to chapter 7. The Book of Enoch, chapter 7, all right? And let's go ahead and read this whole chapter. It says, "And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, And they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh, and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. Okay, family, so most of us have read that verse before. That's nothing new. But you're going to see today that we're going to be reading these texts, and then we're going to really dive deep and get some understanding on some of these things and what actually happened. Now let's go to Genesis chapter 6, and let's read verse 4. That's the book of Genesis chapter 6. We're going to read verse 4. It says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown." All right, family. So now we're seeing that these two passages are clearly talking about the same event, right? But that's okay. Right now, what we're going to do first is we're going to focus on this word that was used for giants. This word that was used for giants, because in both of these passages we see the word giant. And this is our subject matter today. So this word, when we break it down, this word in the Hebrew is H5303, and it is the word Nifl or Nifl, right? And it means one who is fallen, or one who's in a fallen state. But what I want to point out, you know what? I'm not going to point it out right now, because I want to come back to it. I want to come back to it at the end of this lesson. So hopefully I don't forget. Let's keep going. All right. Now that we have gone into this word for giant, right? Now we're going to move right along. We're not gonna stay on this word giant. I just want to point out that the word itself doesn't mean giant. There's nothing about the word that indicates that it means giant. It simply means to fall. So let's move on to the book of remembrance of Enoch. And because we're going into the book of Enoch and the book of remembrance of Enoch, we're not going to keep calling it the book of remembrance of Enoch for this lesson. We're simply going to call it the Haggai, because the full name of the text is the book of remembrance of Enoch, the Essene book of Haggai. So we're not going to go into the reason why it's called that right now. We've done it before. It's a subject that I love to talk about, but this isn't the place for it. But for right now, we're just going to call it the Haggai. So we're going to go into the Haggai, and we're going to go into Seth chapter 1, and we're going to read verses 38 through 42. That's Seth chapter 1, verses 38 through 42 in the Haggai. It says, "And it came to pass that Lamech gloried in his wickedness, like unto his father Cain." Remember, Cain is Cain, family. So it says, "And it came to pass that Lamech gloried in his wickedness, like unto his father Cain. And he made a pact with the son of the comet, who is called by God Moar the Decadent, that he could go according to his own will and depart away from the traditions and holiness of the ancients. And it came to pass that Simaz, came to Lamech, and he said, "You now have 2 wives. One can be for you, and one can be for me. For I shall reveal to you the manner in which Adah can conceive a child who will be very great in the sight of men. And he can be given a vision of my choosing, insomuch that he will be able to overcome all of your enemies. And no other man shall have a child like him. And you shall truly be seen by your fellows to be a master builder, the greatest of all." All right, family. So with what we just read, let's understand a few things. It says that he entered into a pact with the son of a comet. This, family, is referring to Satan. It says the one who God calls Moar the Decadent. That is the name that the Father has for the devil that we call Satan. Then it says that Simaz came to Lamech. Remember, family, Simaz is the name that Satan calls himself. This is the name that Moar the Decadent calls himself. So the Father calls him Moar the Decadent, and he calls himself Simaz, which is a boast because it means my name has seen, right? It's like someone calling themselves the biggest and the baddest. And then, family, we call him Satan, the adversary, right? So I just wanted to make sure that we have an understanding that this is all talking about the same person, the same individual, right? Now, also, it says that you shall truly be seen by your fellows to be master builder. All right, family. So when we see that master builder, we know that this is a reference to the Masons. The word builder refers to building a snare for your fellow, to dig a pit, to enclose, to wall in. All of these meanings are the origin of the words for Mason. And of course, family, of course, the inspired version refers to this as Mahan, right? So we've talked before about the priest of Mahan. So the priest of Mahan, this is talking about the Masons. These are talking about these quote unquote master builders that we still have in the world today. Understand that initially the name they took was the Society of Seku, which means the Society of the Knife. And we have lessons on that. We're not going to go very deep into that today. I just want to make sure for the people who have not seen those lessons and studied with us before, that might be looking at these lessons for the first time, hey, this is what these things mean. And you can go and study these things yourself, right? All right. Now let's go back to the text. Back into the Haggai. We're going to start at verse 40. It says, "And it came to pass that Simaz taught Lamech how to use the element of wickedness, so that by it they could conceive a child with a wicked vision. And Lamech went in unto Adah in secret to perform it. But Adah revealed to the other wife of Lamech, who is called Zillah, because she worked in darkness, the manner in which it was done. And Zillah was jealous, and she asked Lamech to give her a child of such greatness. But he said Adah was suited better for the purpose of conceiving such a child, who is called Niphilim, for she was not his rightful rib. And Simaz took delight in the sorrows of her dismay and jealousy. And it came to pass that the wife God made for Naomi conceived a son against her will by Lamech. And Simaz and the Decadarchi offered themselves to perform it. And she was stricken, and Lamech was the first to perform this great wickedness among the children of men. And he valued his child of the Nephilim more than any other. And Zillah became angry, and she spread abroad the manner in which it was done. And the standing of Lamech among some of his fellows was seen to be one of dishonor, insomuch that Lamech was sorely ashamed before all his brethren. And it came to pass that he cast out Adah alone with no provision, and he slew his Nephilim son in his 14th year, in the heat of anger. All right, family, so let's understand what we just read. We read, family, in the Book of Enoch that these fallen watchers went in unto the women, unto these women that they thought were beautiful, right? But we see here that it didn't have anything to do with them being beautiful, but it had to do with them incorporating a perverse level of sin in their lives. And in the case of Adah, this wasn't so. We've talked about Adah before. We have a whole lesson about Adah and the power of forgiveness. But Adah, it said here that she was the wife of Naom. She was the rightful rib of Naom, but she was stolen away, family. She was stolen away by Lamech. And then Lamech forced her to bear his children. So understand what was really going on here. Why was it that Lamech thought that she was better suited to have the Nephilim child than Zillah was? It was because Zillah was Lamech's rightful rib, but oh no, when you are conceiving a Nephilim child, you actually want for the mother to not be your rightful rib, because you want as much wickedness to be going down as you possibly can. So understand that he's like, no, she's better suited for this, because this is the one that it won't just be me going into her, but I'm going to bring the Decadarchi into it, the fallen watchers into it. You understand, family, what was going on here? This was an act of sorcery. This was an act of sorcery, family. So, what happened here was, number one, multiple wives were going on, which is a thing that the fallen watchers love. Why? Because it gives them a chance to enter in. And then, and also it goes against the sanctity of marriage, right? It goes against one of the four orders of creation, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So, family, what happened was he entered into Adah with great wickedness, and he performed acts of sorcery that are not written. They're not written because, we don't want anyone to go into this book and learn how to do these horrible acts themselves. So, it actually says in the Book of Remembrance that the seer was forbidden from writing the exact details. And I'm glad that he was. This isn't something that needs to be spread abroad. All right, family. And then it tells you kind of an overview of what happened. There is in the Book of Remembrance of our ancient grandmothers, it goes into more detail about exactly what happened when it deals with Lamech and Adah and Zillah and that Nephilim son, right? It goes into much more detail, but the overview here just lets you know that he was slain in his 14th year, okay? And that's all that's important for right now. So, now let's move on to, we're going to stay in the same book, but we're going to go in the Haggai to Seth chapter 3, and we're going to start at verse 85. Seth chapter 3, verse 85, it says, "And it came to pass that Enoch saw that Zillah was the midwife for the Nephilim of Lamech, by Adah. And it was said that Adah told how it was accomplished, and it was Zillah and Awan who caused the mothers of the Nephilim to submit themselves, for they told them stories of glory and greatness for any who bore one of the Nephilim. Wow, family. So we know that Zillah, her name means to work in darkness, family. But what about Awan? Who is this? Family, if you'll remember, Awan was actually the rightful rib of Cain, of Kenna, right? And we understand, family, that when Cain left, when he left his father and his brothers and sisters and his mother, we understand that Awan went with him. And we understand that from other lessons where we've talked about, and if you've read this in the books of remembrance, it talks about how basically they began to bicker with each other, and it was not a good thing. And much wickedness came because of that, and how they would go on to raise their respective families. But anyway, look what it says. It says that Zillah and Awan, they were the ones who petitioned these women to submit themselves so that the Nephilim could be born. And so we don't read that in the Book of Enoch text, where it says that these women, it says that all whom they chose. That makes it sound like the women were picked at random, but you're going to see, and we're going to read it. We're going to read that it wasn't completely random, and it was actually, for a lot of these women, it was part of their agency to do these things. And we're going to read that in the Book of Enoch text. It's something that's glossed over if you don't actually pay attention to it. All right, so let's go ahead, family, and let's go ahead and go back to the Book of Enoch, right? And we're going to read in chapter, let's see what chapter we're going to go to. Let's go to chapter 19, the Book of Enoch, chapter 19. And let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 3. 19 verses 1 through 3. It says, "And Uriel said to me, Here shall stand the angels who have connected themselves with women, and their spirits assuming many different forms are defiling mankind, and shall lead them astray into sacrificing to demons as gods. Here shall they stand till the day of the great judgment, in which they shall be judged till they are made an end of. And the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens. And I, Enoch, alone saw the vision, the ends of all things, and no man shall see as I have seen." All right, family. So this says that the women, these women, family, who the angels went astray, the women also of the angels who went astray, this lets you know that these women went astray. It didn't say that the women that were forced, right? No, this says that these women went astray. It says they shall become sirens, right? So what are sirens? Family, if we look on the internet, the definition for sirens, according to Wikipedia, it says sirens are female human-like beings with alluring voices. Human-like beings, family, with alluring voices, right? This word siren, it comes from the Greek word syria, rope, cord. It means to tie, to join, to fasten, resulting in meaning binder or entangler, one who binds or entangles through magic or song. Wow, family. Family, we have talked about before how women are joiners, right? So when we look on here and we see that this word essentially means to bind or entangle, remember that there is a duality in all things. You have agency, and you can use your agency to use the abilities and gifts that were given to you to glorify the Father and to walk in accordance with your vision of created purpose. Or you can listen to Simaz, to the devil, to Satan. You can listen to him, and then you can use your gifts in a way that you shouldn't be using them. Because remember, those gifts are without repentance. So you can use those gifts to work evil, and people will often think you're doing a good thing with them. Look at all these musical artists out here that are using their wonderful, beautiful voices to really help ensnare people, to bring people down, to have people operating in lower vibrations. That's just a small example of this, right? But understand that this is what was going on. Women who are natural joiners, well, they were using their God-given gifts to help bind these men to the fallen, to decadarchy, right? And before we go on, there's another word that we need to get a definition for. So let's look in the dictionary at the word imprecation. Imprecation. This word means the act of imprecating, cursing, a curse, a malediction. You see that, family? So if someone is dealing with imprecations, then they are dealing with curses. With that said, family, let's stay in the Book of Enoch. The original Book of Enoch, we're going to read chapter 6. The Book of Enoch, chapter 6. It says, "And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Simaz, who we know is Simaz, that's how that's pronounced, and Simaz, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations. So family, by mutual curses, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. Wow, family. And we understand, family, that this mountain that they called Mount Hermon was actually named Mount Pathak by the righteous. But like it says right here in the text, they called it Mount Hermon because of what they did on the mountain, not because it was the mountain's name. So this is another thing that is validating what we read in the Book of Remembrance, right? This is letting you know that the Book of Remembrance that told you that the righteous had a name for the mountain and the wicked had a name for the mountain. Well, this is letting you know why the wicked had a name for the mountain. All right. And we understand, we've talked about this word Hermon before. We've talked about how it goes back to Hermione, like the chick on the wicked Harry Potter movies, right? We understand that like that is a very ancient name, and it's the name actually of a Decadarchy, but we're not going to go into it right now. All right, now let's go back into the Haggai, and we're going to go to Seth chapter 3, and we're going to read verse 86. The Haggai, Seth chapter 3, verse 86. We're going to start at 86 and keep reading though. All right, so it says, "And Enoch saw that Zillah had a Nephilim child by the father of her husband's father, and he was called Mehujael, and he was smitten of God for his many fornications. And thus fornications were multiplied in the land of Heliah, beginning in this same generation." You see that, family? So remember, Zillah actually wanted to conceive a Nephilim. But remember, Lamech told her, no, you're not suited for it. Because Lamech, she was actually Lamech's rightful rib. But no, she had to go and have a son with her father-in-law, right? She had to go, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say a son because the text doesn't say that. She had to go and be impregnated by the father of her husband's father. So actually not even her father-in-law, this is her grandfather-in-law. So she had to be impregnated by her grandfather-in-law, right? Somebody who was into all types of fornications. Let's keep reading, verse 87. "And it came to pass that in answer to his question, Enoch saw and he beheld how some of the wicked among women since ancient times intervened with their agencies to magnify evil of their choosings in the hearts of their husbands." You see that, family? Now all of a sudden sirens make sense when we read that in the Book of Enoch. You see that? Intervened with their agencies. That means they chose. They used their free will to magnify the evil of their choosings in the hearts of their husbands. What? Wow, family. Let's go to verse 88. 88. "Now herein is a great mystery, for when a man knows the desires and intentions of God, he can intervene with his agency to see to it that the desires of God take place, and all the Irkadeshi will obey him. Then the will of God is done, and for him it is truly the intervention of his agency, because he learned and understands clearly, and then he chooses intelligently and knowingly to request and assert himself in righteousness, that it becomes so. And women can do the same with God, but most often they intervene with their agencies in regard to the desires and intentions of their husbands. And they too, intelligently and knowingly, can choose to assert themselves to cause it to be so. And the Irkadeshi will respond to them in this manner, because they view that a woman is taken out of man, but for this reason cannot intervene with his agency in regard to the desires of their wives in the same way. And thus for women, this becomes a very powerful force for either good or evil. You see that, family? So if the woman is acting in a way that is very perverse or evil, then all she's doing is clinging to what is in the heart of the man. Look what it says, family, in the book of Sirach, or Ecclesiasticus, chapter 26, verse 23. It says, "A wicked woman is given as a portion to a wicked man, but a godly woman is given to him that feareth the Lord." That is to say, him that reveres the Lord, that is showing reverence to the Father. You understand, family? You understand what this is talking about? This is letting you know, family, that it is up to the man, as the one who is leading the family, to be sure and steadfast when it comes to guarding his heart, to make sure that he's leading his family in righteousness. Because let me tell you something, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, that woman is going to be swayed by the intentions that are in the heart of the man. And then she is going to push and pull in that direction. So men, what we want to do is be as righteous as we can, so we can keep our ribs as righteous as they can be. You understand? With that being said, family, let's go back to the Haggai. But now we're going to go in the Haggai to Bidal, chapter 10. Bidal, chapter 10. Remember, the Book of Remembrance of Enoch, the Essene book of Haggai, that we're referring to as the Haggai, has two sections in it. The first section is Seth, and the second is Bidal. So, we're going to go to Bidal in the Haggai, chapter 10, and we're going to start at verse 88. It says, "And it came to pass after this, that the crevasse of Senesaol was all astir." Remember, family, we have lessons. We have lessons on Senesaol. It's the lesson we have on the levels of hell, right? And we talk about that. We talk about the origin of hell and Hades and what all these words mean and where they come from, right? And we understand that these things, this area where these things were taking place, it was in the valley of Helea, right? And we talk about that in that lesson as well. Anyway, let's start back at 88. "And it came to pass after this, that the crevasse of Senesaol was all astir, and the Decadarchi took great delight in being given names. And they went about boasting and ranting with great swellings. Now there was one who was chief among them, and he was Motsar, who called himself Semihaza. And he sat listening to those around him, discussing whether the man Enoch approved of them or not. And he said to them, It matters not concerning this man Enoch, whether he approves of you or not. For we shall turn the hearts of all the children of Adam, and they shall choose us, for we have much pleasure to offer them, and they will worship us, and call upon us in the places of our abode within the earth. And they will cause us to come to assist them, and we shall order all their lives and rule over the image of God. And as for this man Enoch, he will be left alone for his much silliness. And all of the Decadarchi received this instruction, and they went their various ways to seek out the sons of men to entice them. And it came to pass that after those days, Semihaza gathered all of his hosts together, and they were 1/3 of the sons of heaven. And he said, I and Asael, my brother. Remember, family, Asael is also a meteorite, right? I and Asael, my brother, who counseled with Lamech. And we have, Salakia, I and Asael, my brother, have counseled with Lamech, and we have discovered to him what can be done, so that we can obtain children by the daughters of men upon the earth. And the matter is now known to him, and it has been accomplished. And I saw that these are the same which are called the Niphilim by the righteous. And Semihaza continued, and he said, And we now have done this deed to have children by the daughters of men. And before now, we knew everything to do except the elements to use to make them strong. And the first of our children were weak, but now we have learned what element to use to make them strong. And now we are the fathers of the sons of men, and they are the great ones among them. And Simaz bragged before all his fellows that he now was a father in creation. And they all envied the Nephilim children that he had, who were now strong because of the element of wickedness. And Simaz knew of their great envy for his children, and he said to them, "If all of you will acknowledge that I am the greatest of all among you, then I will enter into a binding agreement with you to reveal to you how the matter is accomplished, and we can all together go about having children with the daughters of men, according to our wishes." And they said, "We shall enter in together with you to agree to accomplish the deed." And Simaz said, "It is well spoken. Lie fully prostrate before me, spread out, and be vulnerable and submissive to prove that you acknowledge that I am the greatest of all among you." And when this was done to an extreme extent, as to become tedious for them all, and they all had repeatedly sworn oaths before him, and thus severed themselves in the matter, and bound themselves with curses, family, with mutual imprecations, and bound themselves with curses. Then he rehearsed the manner in which they could conduct themselves to conceive children with the daughters of men. And he caused them all to enter into a covenant that they together would call all that they performed good. And he said, "Who can say it is evil when all and each one of us has declared together that all of our doings are good?" Wow, family. So the fallen entered into a wicked covenant together, and they called the covenant good. Look at Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. It says, "Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, that put darkness for light, and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter." You see that, family? The Decadarchi family, like Simaz said, will offer you all manner of pleasures, right? And you will think that these pleasures are good if you don't have the information, the spiritual awareness to realize that these things are bad. So family, we literally were raised in a society that pushes these evils on us and teaches us to go after these things, to plan our lives so that our children can have these things. But understand that it is a trick of the devil. We've talked about this before, not going super deep into that right now because we're staying on topic. We have more to discuss about these Nephilim family. But I want you to understand what was going on here. Understand that Simaz and Asael, they were the two that figured out how they could go into the daughters of men. And as you see, family, from these texts, it actually takes also men themselves. See, they still can't do it without the seed of a man. They actually need the seed of man And then they can work their sorcery to create their children, their Nephilim. But they still need the raw genetic material that is man and woman. So with all of their boasting that they can now create life, what they're doing is a hijack. What they're doing is stealing life, not creating life. This is also what many of the scientists do today when they think they are creating something with their clones and whatnot. Understand that they aren't creating anything. They still have to use the raw genetic material. They still have to use the source. And what did we talk about, family, in our sorcery series? We talked about how sorcery is manipulation of the source, taking what the Father gave us and using it in a way that it was not intended to be used, right? All right. Now, with that said, family, let's continue on. Let's go into the Book of Remembrance of our ancient grandmothers. And we're going to go to chapter 4 and start at verse 88. That's Ancient Grandmothers chapter 4, verse 88. It says, "And it came to pass that I saw a despicable thing. I saw that the father of Lamech, who is called Mehujael, which means smitten of God, and he took her in, and Zillah taught him all the doings of evil. And in time she bore for him another Nephilim child, and it was a girl. And soon it was openly known how it was done." So see that, family? So Zillah, as we've already discussed, she ran to the father of her father's father. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. She ran to the father of her husband's father's I can't even say, I keep messing this up. She went to her husband's father's father to get impregnated. And then she had a little Nephilim girl, right? Let's keep reading. Verse 89. "And in this way, the great..." Oh, I'm sorry. Did I go too far? Oh, "and it was a girl. And soon it was openly known how it was done. And in this way, the great Nephilim wars began in all the regions of Helea, during the time just preceding the flood. And the children who were brought forth in their conception to hold the spirits of the Decadarchy infested the land, and violence was everywhere. And the inhabitants of Helea were filled with fear and dread, and the hand of every man was against his neighbor. And the wicked used the element of their own souls to hurt and kill and destroy. And it is known in heaven that this is the greatest evil of all, wickedness, when human beings use their own bodies as weapons of destruction. And it can be said that this great evil precipitated or brought forth the flood unto the destruction of all those in the regions of Helea. And I say to you that this great and horrendous evil will show its ugly face in the end of days. And I saw that Zillah and Mehujael were both smitten with a loathsome disease, and they passed away in agony, and their Nephilim child ran amok. And the children beheld that a monster was running loose in the land, and Anochesed mourned at what was becoming of the handiwork of his love. There you have it, family. You want to know the origin of monsters? The Nephilim. The Nephilim were monsters, family. And they were dangerous. And I don't go into it in this particular lesson. But if you read in the Book of Remembrance of our ancient grandmothers, you can read about how one of these monsters actually slew some very righteous folks. I'm not going to go into them right now, but it was really a sad thing. But it lets you know. It lets you know that these things are real, family. They are real, and there are levels to them. And hey, you know what? Let me stop going off on tangents. Let's just keep going. Stay in the book of remembrance of our ancient grandmothers and go to chapter 6. Chapter 6, and let's go to verse 99. We're going to read verse 99 because I want y'all to get a better picture of what these Nephilim were like. So Grandmothers chapter 6, verse 99. And it came to pass that the wicked masters of Helea brought into being Niphilim, intended to seek out the principal men of service in the order intended to seek out the principal men of service in the authority of Elda, to destroy them. And the two masters of Seku, remember family, that's Masons, right? Priest of Mahan, let's keep going. And the two masters of Seku came to Qatar with such a Nephilim, whose name was Buhu, for his soul was empty. And he would look, but he could not see. And he would listen, but he could not hear. And he would utter, but he could not speak. And he would engage, but he could not feel. So family, this is letting you know that these Nephilim were void of a conscience. And family, I had decided that I wasn't going to go into it, but I will go ahead and speak on it really quickly. I'm just not going to go into all the verses that go with it. We have done that before. We have talked about this before. But I want to point out that this is the reason why when you're reading in the book of Genesis and it talks about how these were like the men of old. Well, what it's referring to, family, it's referring to the creeping things that were living before Adam was created, before Yatsakad was created. Because the creeping things, family, didn't have all four spirits of life in them. They didn't have those four spirits in them. They only had two of the four spirits. And because of that, these things and everything that was in Olam, remember Olam, that was the name of creation before Eden, right? Before it was created to be a place for us, before the Messiah put his hand to it, right? Before then, it was called Olam. And these creeping things that were in Olam, they weren't feeling, they weren't trying to raise their young. They didn't experience love, family. They didn't experience what the Messiah had to offer, right? And so I'm letting you know that this is why it says that in Genesis. This is why it refers to men of renown. This is talking about the creeping things, family. There ain't nothing glorious about who it's referring to, though. You understand? All right. Now, family, stay in the book of remembrance of our ancient grandmothers, chapter 6, and let's start at verse 102. Verse 102, it says, And the Nephilim wars among the wicked became fierce, and fear rose up like smoke in all their encampments. And I beheld with Urim that a strange spirit began to descend over the wicked, and it seemed irresistible, and it compelled them to want to gather in the regions of Helea, out from all of their domain. And they desired to gather into one body, so it could be determined who would have supreme dominance over them all. And in their minds, they intended to rule over the whole earth. And each of the masters of Seku was determined that he should be the grand master. And their intention was to have one grand assembly. And they all prepared themselves with what they considered the means to overcome their fellows, and weapons were seen everywhere. And it came to pass that by this strong spirit, the wicked felt compelled to migrate into the valleys of Helea. And the migration lasted for 7 years in an attempt to join into one body. And each of them proceeded with utmost caution to protect their secrets, which were that which they used to try to overcome their enemies. And it was very difficult for them to defend themselves, because they all had slaves, and only some of which were faithful to them. But there was strong hatred toward them on the part of others, and these could not be trusted. Thus, many of the masters of Seku decided to cause their servants and slaves to make oaths of allegiance with self-cursings, which are called imprecations. And the ones who would not take such oaths to maintain their secrets were abandoned and left behind. And there were thousands who were left stranded and destitute, with no provisions or skills to live. And they milled about, and they did not know how to care for one another or organize themselves, except by that which they had always known as slaves. And many perished by violence, and for the want of food, and blood was poured out upon the earth. And they began with difficulty to establish themselves in the areas where they were left. And those who could manage to provide for themselves and stay together went southward. And they feared the regions of Mahuja and Qatar. And I could see that they were lost and could not easily adapt to being free after generations of captivity by hard and cruel masters. And this was all the more so because their captivity was done for the purposes of supporting religions of evil. Wow, family. So just that piece of history lets you know how diabolical the slavery even here in the Americas that our people went through. It lets you know how diabolical that slavery was, because I'm pretty sure many of you can read through this and something in your spirit starts to identify with what these people were going through, right? Family, also I want to point out that the spirit that was on these people on the wicked for them to have dominance over their fellows. Understand, family, that all that was going on in the regions of Helea, a lot of this stuff would continue to go on in the levels of hell. And we have talked about that in our lesson, again, that we did on the levels of hell. I believe it's called Hell, the Levels, and the Darkness. I think that's the name of that one. But if you go back and listen to that lesson again, after listening to this lesson, you'll notice it's like, wow, this stuff is really cohesive. You can really see how the wicked move in this world and the next, right? All right. Now, family, let's go back into the Book of Remembrance of Enoch. We're talking about the Haggai. We're going back to the Haggai, and let's go to Bedial chapter 10. We're going in the Haggai to Bedial chapter 10, and let's read verses 141 through 143. Bedial chapter 10, verses 141 through 143. It says, "And as Enoch began to ponder all that had come upon him in Seol, he prayed unto the Lord, and he said, What shall I do with the request of those who dwell in Seol? They desire of me that I petition you with a long-standing petition written in stone that will save them from the day of recompense. I have reprimanded them, as you have said, and I have brought all of their iniquities to be known before their faces, and I have established the reprimand before all creation. And they have no remorse of soul for all they do, and they act terribly before you every day. And it came to pass that the Lord drew near, and his light shone upon Enoch. And the Lord came and sat upon the ground, and he said, They have severed themselves with all of the ways of the wicked, and they will not repent, neither can they, for they have used their own souls as the element of wickedness, from which there is no forgiveness. All right, family, so now you see that this event where Simaz had them to lay prostrate and bound themselves with mutual imprecations, this is where they severed themselves in wickedness. And when they chose to use their souls as the element of wickedness, family, remember family, that the watchers, when they act in holiness, were designed to be the storehouse of the Holy Spirit. So now you know, family, now you know how to grieve the Holy Spirit, how to take part in the unforgivable sin. And I say this not so you can do it, but I say this because I know that there are many out there who read these verses. As a matter of fact, let's just read it. Let's go to Matthew chapter 12 and read verse 31. Matthew 12 verse 31, it says, Wherefore I say unto you, all manner of sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven unto men, but the blasphemy against the Holy Ghost shall not be forgiven unto men. So I know that people read this verse, family, and then they start to get in their head about whether or not they have committed this sin. And then they start to, it affects them in such a way that they can give up their faith altogether, because they will believe that they have committed this great offense. And it vexes people, but it vexes them only because of their own ignorance. So let me now try to clear this ignorance up. This ain't something you can do by accident. You can't accidentally commit the unpardonable sin. No, you have to on purpose. You have to on purpose go and use your own soul for the element of wickedness. You understand me, family? So, I just want to clear that up, put that out there, so we can understand. Now, let's stay in the Haggai. Bidal chapter 14, and let's start at verse 44. Bidal chapter 14, verse 44. It says, Up until now, I have asked you to make 4 divisions in the midst of creation. This is the Messiah talking to Enoch. Listen. Up until now, I have asked you to make 4 divisions in the midst of creation. And those divisions have drawn the righteous and holy souls in creation to a place where they can affirm the great decrees of creation. But by these same divisions and the direction they have been taken by the wicked, they too stand prepared by them to enlarge their rebellion, to bring it to a fulfillment. First, all the sons of heaven were divided and given a name. Those who are holy, who are called the Irkadeshi, use their holy names to glorify and serve my Father in all his purposes in creation. And the evil ones, who are called the Decadarchi, use their names to perform every evil pursuit of wickedness and rebellion. And the both of them are well satisfied with their names, and with the station which they have chosen in this division. Secondly, when the waters were divided, to be either bitter or sweet, both the righteous and the wicked accepted the task that this division gave to them. Accordingly, the righteous sons of heaven moved out and flowed down like living water toward the establishing the city of holiness, to bless and uplift and tenderly strengthen all of the children of the righteous in their instincts to love my Father. But the wicked fallen ones move out and spill their filthiness over in their determination to fight against the consciousness of man, to know right from wrong and good from evil. And their intent is to seduce all the children of men, so that they may rule over them. And thirdly, when the sons of men were divided, according to the sanctity of marriage, those who are holy take great delight to identify and lay hold of the loved ones of Enoch, he said, and they set themselves to love them and tenderly support them in their love for one another, and to stand firm in their virtue of the sanctity of marriage. But those who are in the shadow of darkness took delight in fornication and in the bondage of lust, and they gladly set out to see to it that the sons of men were seduced into ways of corruption and decadence. And lastly, now that the division of days has been established, the righteous will use their holy days to comfort my Father, and to magnify and to enlarge their association with the pathway back to Eden. But the wicked will use their days and how they have divided them to find opportunity to expand deceit. I'm going to stop right there for just a second, family, because I want to point out that there is a reason that the world has their own calendar, and the reason is being exposed right here. So it says, let's start back at verse 53. It says, but the wicked will use their days and how they have divided them to find opportunity to expand deceit, and they intend to cause their evil to grow, to dominate the world. And they will see to it that their division of days will result in their being able to find dominance over their fellows. And for the first time, the earth will know the poor, and the poor of the earth shall mourn in their bondage. And the Lord said, and I would instruct you further, my children, to also know that along with the effect of these 4 divisions, which you have accomplished at my word, the first great sevening was completed, with the return to Eden by your first parents. It was completed among both the righteous and the wicked on that day. And because of this, the wicked have also come into their fullness in establishing their own division of days and their religion, and they have clarified their intentions fully for a way of life drawing upon the type of sevening that has transpired in their midst. For they celebrate the covenant Cain made with Simaz, and the invention of knives by Lamech, and the establishment of the secret society of Seku by Kohath. And they celebrated the beginning of tribute and slavery, which marked the beginning of nations. And they celebrate the birthday of the Niphilim, delivered by Zillah. And they mark a day to show the satisfaction of possessions, with much pride and boisterousness. And they had their day of the new year, coinciding with the phases of the moon. There you have it, folks. Right there in the Book of Remembrance of Enoch, in the words delivered by the Messiah himself, he lets you know that they marked a day to show the satisfaction of possessions with much pride and boisterousness. That's it, family. That's Christmas. You see that? And it celebrates the birth of the Nephilim, not the birth of the Messiah. You see that? The birth of Nephilim and the satisfaction of possessions. That is what Christmas is about. So anybody dealing with that Christmas spirit, repent. Get your children away from that wickedness. They don't need to take part in it. You understand me? You're hurting your children more than you're helping your children. If you think, oh, this ain't gonna hurt nothing. All right. Now, family, mentioned in these passages that we just read were the decrees of creation. So let's go and read those decrees of creation. Let's go into the Book of Remembrance of 1st and 2nd Achi. And let's go into 2nd Achi chapter 3. And let's read verse 49. 2nd Achi chapter 3 verse 49. It says, And it came to pass that the great Holy One reached forth his hand again, and he laid hold of a great scroll, and he handed it to the herald of the presence. And again a great trump sounded loud and long and clear, and the sound of it shook all the foundations of eternity. And the chief braced himself and tried to stand ready to hear it. And the herald proclaimed with a loud voice the first decree of creation, which says, The Holy Great One can be a father to man in creation by the power of the intervention of the agency of his Son, who is in the flesh as are all men. And the herald was facing east, and he turned himself about to face west. And the great trump sounded again, and the herald declared the second great decree of creation. For he said, It was like unto the first, and it says, that all the doings of creation and all of the affairs of salvation of man must be done by man through the power of the intervention of their agency. You see that, family? You see why agency is so important? You see why the wicked just can't come out and force people to behave a certain way? No, they have to butter you up, family. They have to butter you up and get you to make the decision yourself. You understand? So, with that said, let's go back into the Haggai and let's go to Aboout chapter 14 and let's read verse 57. Aboout chapter 14 verse 57. It says, And because of all these things, the wicked have come now to be in a position to challenge the two great decrees of creation that were declared in Eden by the intervention of their agency. And the loving kindness of my Father is so great that he will not assert himself to forbid his children from denying him and his purposes in creation. And should the one who has arisen succeed, the decrees of creation that come from Moar the Decadent may be set in place upon the earth. But be calm in your souls, because the righteous also have been wisely prepared to affirm the decrees of creation of my Father, and to establish them to be immovable until the end of days, at which time they must be re-established in the face of wickedness that shall arise in that day. And I say to you now, that the best way for the righteous to establish this affirmation of the decrees of creation is to divide the earth. And the Lord ended his speaking for a moment. So now we see why it was so important for Enoch to divide the earth, to separate good from evil on every level. Now, family, let's go back into the book of remembrance of our ancient grandmothers, and let's read chapter 9, and let's start at verse 5. That's the book of remembrance of our ancient grandmothers, chapter 9, and we're going to start at verse 5. It says, it says, and as you know, we call all of the holy spirits of life in creation the Irkadeshi, which is to say, the watchers of holiness. And Yatsakad called the evil ones the Irwanavor. I can't pronounce this, y'all. The Irvanoi. That's what Adam, our first father, or Yatsakad, called the evil ones. Anyway, and Yatsakad called the evil ones the Irvavnoi, which is to say, the watchers of wickedness. But Enoch named the fallen ones bullies, or that is to say, the Decadarchi, because of how they treated one another in the great crevasse in the barrens of the eastern waste places of the high plains of Mount Mahuja. And now we know how to distinguish among them. And all angels are sent by Enoch said, and there are no bad angels. And it came to pass, when I heard Shamar say, there are no bad angels, I determined to inquire of the Lord concerning what she said. And I said, Lord, we have commonly held that there are good angels and bad angels, and indeed that Moar the Decadent has angels. Please instruct me regarding her point of view. And the Lord began to instruct me by his Spirit, and he said that good angels are resurrected spirits of people who have lived on the earth among men, who are sent from Enoch said to do good works, and they have patterned their natures after the character of Motsa the Lamb. And they are always kind and gentle, and they will not assert themselves upon anyone to force their way, and they are very respectful, and they will not intrude on anyone in like manner as him. And while angels can act to perform deeds, they can change the course of the earth, and they can determine the pathways of nations, and they only do so through their influence with the Irkadeshi, together with the righteous men in the temporal world, according to the decrees of creation. And on the other hand, those which some have called bad angels are not the spirits of those who have been evil in their lives upon the earth. And this is because all people are resurrected, both the good and the bad. And those who enter into the first station, unclean and evil, are restrained there, or they are subject to the second death. And in either case, they cannot act as messengers for the powers of evil. And this is so because when people die, they no longer have the Decadarchi for companions, and they cannot act together with their evil fellows who lived upon the earth. But there are spirits of evil who are called demons, and they are the spirits of the Niphilim. And Niphilim are people whose spirits are stolen at conception by the very wicked. And they are the only persons ever born who are void of the spirit of Motsa the Lamb. And because he is the resurrection, they cannot be resurrected. And the wicked have been instructed by Moar the Decadent to place in the Nephilim the spirit of an animal, or a bird, or a fish, together with their human spirit of life. And thus, the Nephilim are a combination of a person and an animal. And this was common among the wicked before the flood. And they sinned against animals and birds and the fish of the sea. And after the flood, the knowledge of these Nephilim was remembered, and the nations of evil used them as gods and made many images of them for themselves. You see that, family? That's where you get all of those Egyptian gods that have the heads of different animals and things like that. Nephilim. They're worshiping the Nephilim as gods. Anyway, let's continue to read. And the nations of evil used them as gods, and made many images of them for themselves. And because those engaged in wickedness have thus made images of them, and continually call for their spirits to present themselves, we can be subject to the feelings of their presence. And Enoch said aloud, 1/10 of the spirits of the demons of the earth to remain after the flood. And these are what are called angels of the adversary. And these impose themselves upon everyone they can tempt and destroy and possess their bodies. And they oppose all the works of God and his holy angels. Now understand that all mankind except the Nephilim are born innocent little babies. And they in their little souls, each and every one, are in the presence of Enoch said himself, and they can see most of the Lamb. But the Nephilim are born without any presence of the indwelling spirit of our Savior, and being born without his spirit, they have no pathway to be resurrected. And after they die, their spirits wander upon the earth, looking to do evil at every turn. And their visions only express the evil purposes of the wicked who brought them into being. You see that, family? So remember when Simaz said, I can give them visions. Remember that? That's what he was talking about. He was talking about giving them his wicked visions, because understand that these are stolen souls. You understand? He took the egg and the sperm. He stole that and used his own wicked sorcery to create the Nephilim. And that is why there is no path. There is no path for them back to redemption. There's no way for them to be redeemed, because their beginning was in wickedness. All right, family. So remember that at this time, after the flood, we understand that most of these spirits were sealed away, right? But it says here that 1/4 of them were allowed to stay and wander upon the earth, right? I want you to understand, though, what that means. If you read this text closely, you'll see that it says that these people who revere these fallen watchers as gods, they can still bring forth the feeling of the presence of them. They can still do that, family. So even though only 1/4 of them remain upon the earth, their presence can still be evoked upon the earth, the feeling of their presence. And I don't even pretend to know all of the ramifications of what that actually means. You know, what can a person do with the feeling should be the question that you ask when you understand that, right? But what about these 4, family, that are left over? Like, what are they left over for? What are they left over to do, right? Now we know that the devil, he wanted to use them, and we've read those verses before. We're not going into that right now. But what we want to know is, for the purposes of us living right now in these end times, how does that affect us? So let's get into it. Actually, let's see. Do we want to go here first? You know what? Okay, we'll go into it, but first let's go here. First, let's go into the Book of Remembrance of Our Ancient Grandmothers, chapter 11. And let's read verse 35. Grandmother's 11, and we'll start at 35. But in the valleys of Helea, the Nephilim wars were becoming exceedingly fierce, and every master of Seku sought only to suppress his enemies and gain power over them. And the people there had no hope or consciousness of regret, and the gift of life meant nothing to them, and their hearts were cold, and death prevailed there, and fear and loathing. And it could be seen that the spirits of the Nephilim began to be the example of how all people were to act. And the Nephilim were called demons by Moses the Lamb, and they presided over all the earth in that quarter. And the Nephilim were such that the wicked were taught by Moar the Decadent, who we call Satan, to blend a human spirit with the spirits of birds, animals, and water creatures. And at conception, before it was born, the spirit of a child would be stolen from Enoch by means of the evil practices to become a Nephilim. And in this way, the wicked sinned against birds and fish and creatures that were in the fields, and against the very person of Enoch. And thus the wicked corrupted their way in creation, insomuch that their wickedness could not be constrained with human values of decency, kindness, or repentance. And the Nephilim became the gods of the wicked, and for many they perished, to be considered gods by the nations of the wicked after the flood. So you see that? They continue to be considered as gods, and people would be invoking their actual presence. Now, let's go into the little book of John the Revelator. The little book of John the Revelator. If you don't know where that is, it is in the back of the Book of Remembrance of Melchizedek. So look in the back of the Book of Remembrance of Melchizedek, and we're going to go into the little book of John the Revelator, chapter 1, verse 82. It says, "And my Father responded further to set in place the limits of tolerance for evil among the Irkadeshi and the righteous, to endure evil and wickedness until that limit has been met. And the limit comes when the agency and plans of the wicked expand to such an extent that they now attack the four orders of creation." Salakia, it says that they know to attack the four orders of creation, to eliminate them. Then, Selah, it is enough. And under these conditions, Michael and Geera are free to act, together with all the concourse of heaven, and all the forces of holiness are free to assert themselves for Enoch, each in their calling and in their station, to act and respond to the request of the righteous and the desires of my Father, being buttressed by the holy order in the midst of the earth. And the wicked will find no place to stand or to practice their evil ways. And because of this boundary being set, they can proceed no further in destroying my Father's desires and purposes in creation, as the Father of them all. And the flood came upon them, because the wicked of Helea effectively suppressed agency with slavery and with the intimidation of violence, and by uttering dark sentences in their practice of sorcery, and with stern commandments of harsh control. And in Helea, the practice of adultery and fornication came to the full in their practice of bringing the Nephilim children by the women there. And everything sacred about male and female became fully corrupted, in the extent that there was no sanctity of marriage. And in Helea, they magnified the sounds of death with loud contention and rudeness before the God of heaven. And they made fearsome noises in war and fighting. And there was much discord and quarreling, and expressions of anger against the children were more common than the songs of birds. And all the sweet moments of living life were thrust out from among them, and each person had to live their lives according to an evil master's wishes, and the book of life there had no entries in it, for Enoch said to reminisce over. And indeed, those among the Irkadeshi there who were supposed to write in it did not even know there was such a book. And the masters of Seku in Halea dominated all who dwelt there, and they demanded to be worshipped as gods, and any expression of worship of Enoch said was forbidden. And the people were made to acknowledge their masters in all things, and express allegiance to them, even for all their daily provisions. And they were compelled to give thanks to their masters for everything in their lives. And because of the acts of Enoch said to set boundaries for evil, the limits of tolerance of the Irkadeshi and the host of heaven came to the full, as it will now in this day. And when the Decadarchi began to bring forth the Nephilim, especially meant to attack the four orders of creation, the waters of the flood were ready to sweep over them. And when this limit of tolerance was met, it tipped the scales, and the wicked were destroyed by the waters of the flood. So when the righteous observe these things in the end of days, and these same conditions come up before your faces, that the four orders of creation are in like manner being attacked, you will know that once again the limits of tolerance have come to be met, and the wicked will be destroyed by fire. Family, why did we read that? We read that, family, because those four leftover spirits of the Nephilim that are active upon the earth, those four are here, each one, to attack one of the four orders of creation. And the four orders of creation are our agency, the sanctity of marriage, living life, and the worship of Enoch said. You understand, family? That's what was going on in the valleys of Halea. That's why the flood had to come and wipe them out completely. Understand that there were no entries in the book of life. Are you hearing me? Not a one, not a single entry, to the extent that the Irkadeshi there didn't even know there was a book of life, because they never had a need to use it. You understand? Family, this right here, look around you and ask yourself if our agency is being attacked, if the sanctity of marriage is being attacked, if living life is being attacked, and if the worship of Enoch said is being attacked. Let's go back into the book of remembrance of our ancient grandmothers, and let's read in Grandmothers chapter 12, verse 84. It says, "And it came to pass that Noah went to his place of prayer at the time of the noon meal, and he was distraught in his soul, and his compassion for these people abounded. And there was a rock on the ground in his place of prayer. And Noah placed his hand upon the rock, and he was taught to do this by Ozin. And he said, O Motsa, I have come to ask you a favor, for I have loved you, and I have only thought of how to bless you. And yet it seems I have failed, because I need to know what to do. For I hear the spirits of the Nephilim are still upon the earth, and I have failed in my task before you. Please forgive me. I am so sorry. Your children are in fear and distress. And Noah closed his eyes and wept. And Noah felt a touch upon his shoulder, and it was Motsa the lamb standing there. And Noah turned and sat upon the ground, and Motsa sat upon the rock by his side. And after Noah recovered his composure, Motsa began to speak, and the light of his presence shone upon Noah. And he said, I will explain how you have pleased my father, Enoch said in heaven, by the performance of your task. Since the beginning, there are 40 Nephilim that have been brought into being by the wicked, by the use of blood. And all but 4 have been brought about by the first generations of the masters of Seku, because of jealousy, pettiness, lust, and greed. And all 36 of them pointed to some present moment when their makers fought for dominance over their fellows, or for the satisfaction of possessions. And because of the momentary nature of them, they all have perished in the movements of the flood, and are no more. And both they and their parents are gone from the earth, together with all their spirits. But the last generations of the masters of Seku set their hands to intervene with their agencies against the established order of creation. For Enoch said has set in place 4 orders of creation. And these evil men informed themselves thoroughly about these orders that were set in place, and they determined that it would not be to their advantage, according to the prosperity of their many deceits, to allow such orders to prevail in continuance. And they purposefully considered one by one each of the 4 orders of creation, and they created a unique Nephilim for each order, with the intention of destroying it. And while these 4 Nephilim perished in the flood, their spirits remain upon the earth, because they intervened with their agencies according to the decrees of creation. And now the spirits of these evil Nephilim feel summoned by the use of the very elements of wickedness that created them. And the primary element is blood. And the Lord said, "Now understand that before the flood, the righteous and the wicked were separate and developed independently from one another. But now, during the long duration of the earth, they will be blended together in all their living. So the division of the earth, accomplished by your old fathers, and joinings brought into being by your old mothers, both being strongly undergirded by the gentle guidances of Enoch said, have given birth to a human social conscience. And it was those without conscience that were destroyed in the flood. And in the same manner, when the world is filled once again with the living dead, in the end of days, the wicked will be destroyed by fire." And the Lord continued to speak with Noah, as they both sat together upon the earth. And the Lord said, "The masters of Seku did not want the lives of people to be focused on their family and friends, but they wanted their lives to be focused on them. And they did not want them to find fulfillment in living out their visions of created purpose, but they wanted all those who they could persuade or compel to support them to live their lives for them, and for all their successes to benefit themselves as masters. So they rose up, determined to destroy the order set in place, which is called the gift of life. And they instead set in place all the divisions of days emanating from the world of sorcerers and vile idolaters, and those who work in darkness. And they changed the Sabbath days, and named the days after their pagan gods, and the months of the years also. And their memorable days are filled with drunkenness and fornications, and they spill the blood of infants and the innocent. And in this way the gift of life of the people languishes. And the masters did not want agency, because they desired to rule over all men and dictate themselves. Excuse me, family. And the masters did not want agency, because they desired to rule over all men and dictate themselves to see that everyone followed their choices. And thus they were determined to see to it that by acts of oppression that they could have their agency prevail to overcome those of all others. And Moar the Decadent was a ready and willing partner in all their efforts, and he helped them establish their nations. You see that, family? One nation under God, What God is it under? You understand, family? And he helped them establish their nations. And they did not want the sanctity of marriage when they knew full well what it was, because they liked fornication. And it was central to how they brought forth their Nephilim. And by deceits, they trafficked the unsuspecting into bondage of fornication. So they intervened with the element of wickedness to destroy the sanctity of marriage. And they did not want anyone to be in any service to anyone but themselves. And they mocked any idea of service to Enochicid, and established high priests of Seneseol. And they performed all this, knowing precisely what they had set about to do. And because these masters intervened with their agencies to destroy these orders of creation, they found themselves fighting against all forms of the living water and the very body of Enochicid. And in the end, they were overtaken by the waters of the flood. And the spirits of those four Nephilim must remain upon the earth till the end thereof, because the decrees of creation and that which they produce with their Nephilim, who were meant to destroy these four orders, and because it was done by the intervention of their agencies using the element of wickedness, and because it was not done in the ignorance of pettiness or jealousy or greed, and know that these Nephilim spirits can be called to abide with any who use the element of blood that was used to create them. And in some cases, even living by evil concepts they set in place will cause these demon spirits into attendance. Let me read that again. I read something wrong. It didn't flow right. And in some cases, even living by the evil concepts they set in place will call these demon spirits into attendance. And it came to pass that the Lord instructed Noah to teach those who came from Qatar, and indeed all of the people, what can be done to be protected from the spirits of the Nephilim. And the Lord said, you can be protected from these four abiding Nephilim by avoiding any element of wickedness that brought them forth. Therefore, do not eat anything strangled, or use the blood of it, or get it upon you. For the evil masters used it to gain the upper hand over their enemies in order to destroy agency. And this is so that a few could dominate and rule over many. And strangulation has been used by the wicked for this purpose, as element unto this day. And the masters used the menstrual blood of fornication to bring about the destruction of the sanctity of marriage. And in this way they brought forth the Nephilim, and they used having more than one wife for this purpose. And for this reason, all of the righteous should avoid sleeping together as husband and wife during times of menstruation. And they offered animal blood to their Nephilim idols as the element of wickedness, so they could destroy all service to Enochicid and replace it with service to powers that would support their evil designs. And they used human blood of sacrifice to empower Moar the Decadent, supposing they would gain favor in his sight to destroy the orders of the gift of life. And by this means they thus divert the souls of the righteous to be set upon the earth, and in this way pronounce harsh words against Enochicid, accusing him of being angry and violent because he needs to be appeased away from his vengeance by blood. And in this way they take his name in vain. Therefore they use blood to take the holy name of Enochicid in vain. You see that, family? You see how the spirits of these Nephilim can still affect you when you take part in these things in some way? Get away from this stuff, family. Now, family, Remember at the beginning of this lesson, we went into the word for Nephilim, right? Well, and we saw that word was translated as giant. But in everything we just read, aside from what was written in the Bible, which, by the way, we know what the Book of Remembrance of Moses says about what was written in the Bible. Not going to go into that right now because it's time for this lesson to be wrapping up. But we understand that aside from that, we didn't see this word giant. Oh, and we also saw it in the Book of Enoch. We saw the word giant in there, right? Let's read in the back of the Book of Remembrance of our ancient grandmothers. Let's read the seer's comments on the Nephilim. It says the word Nephilim in the Strongs is 5303, a tyrant or bully. The word comes from 5307, Nifl, meaning to fall. The IM on the word Nephilim simply indicates the plural. The word giant is included in the 5303 definition, but only because of traditional use. The root word 5307 has no indication to any concept of giant or largeness. From that which I have seen with the Urim, they were not any different in stature than the people of the pre-flood period. The later traditions about them being large is understandable, but inaccurate as to their actual size. First of all, Nephilim were brought about by hunter-gatherers, and they had little time to do anything else in life than to simply survive. And these creatures were a huge imposition and hindrance to such a lifestyle. So traditions arose that it took a gargantuan effort to keep them fed. And these Nephilim were individuals who had no conscience. They had very limited ability to reason, and they were brought into being to be used as weapons against the enemies of their masters. They could not hunt or perform routine tasks that the society they lived in required. Someone had to do everything for them. There was a hardship for those living in a hunter-gatherer society. And the Nephilim were unpredictable and dangerous. They required handlers, much like a wild animal. It is true that the fallen angels of heaven had children with human women, and the Nephilim were humans with a human father and mother, but their spirits were only one half human. Their animal spirit came from their father and was implanted in their souls. Conception by the use of vile sorcery and acts of darkness using blood as the element of wickedness. That is where the idea that they sinned against animals and birds originated and then was carried into later traditions. So you would have a person, male or female, who had their spirit defined by the spirit of an animal, and their mental capacity expressed the animal spirit that they possessed. This dynamic was so completely overwhelming that the ancient societies never forgot them. Accordingly, the Nephilim are widely represented in post-flood religions, so you have a multitude of representations of animal-human creatures threaded throughout religious traditions. They are everywhere in antiquity. To cite a few, the Sphinx, a lion with a man's head, the Egyptian god Horus, a man with a falcon's head, the centaur, a horse with a man's torso, another Egyptian god Anubis, a man with an ibis head, Hathor, a woman head on a cow's body, and even angels are thought to be humans with large bird wings. There are many more too numerous to mention. As of this writing, there are genetic experiments underway in laboratories to give human animals parts such as eyes and ears to enhance sight and hearing. It is widely prophesied since ancient times that in the end times, the Nephilim would come upon the earth again. Will there again be wars? using the Nephilim like in ancient times? So far, the indication is that this genetic engineering is focused on making specialized soldiers. It is time for all to put their trust in the Lord like those righteous of ancient times did. You see that, family? So the understanding that these things were giants, I believe that is one of the things that was injected by Solomon and Talul. And if you want to know more about that, look on my lesson about, I believe it's simply titled Levi. In any event, if you search my name and Levi, that lesson should pop up because we go into that in that lesson. But we aren't done with this word for Nephilim, because there's one more thing I want to point out to you. So this word for in the Strongs, that was H5303. This word is constructed using a noon, a pei, and a lamed, or the na, the pa, and the la. And what this word actually means when you break it down based upon the actual Hebrew characters, it says life that has been scattered by instruction. What, family? Life that has been scattered by instruction. This is letting you know, family, that this is life that someone used agency to change. You understand? They forced the hand. This is literal sorcery. I can't think of a word that is more indicative of sorcery than this particular word. And we have seen all throughout this particular lesson that Niphilim are the direct result of sorcery. Sorcery that is a joint effort by both men and the fallen watchers, who are the Decadarchi. You understand? Family, I hope y'all were edified by this today. Please remember, family, that I love each and every one of you. The water, Kai. All praises to Enoch said, Bahashem Motsa, the Lamb. This is little son Sabal Nabaya saying much love and much shalom. From the Book of Remembrance of Moses. And Moses said, I do not even know what they will call your name. Who should I tell the spokesman it was that sent me? And the Lord said, tell him that the great I am loving kindness has sent you, for they know me by that name. And Moses wept, and he said, the children of Israel will not hearken unto my words, for I am nothing before all men. And the Lord drew near, and he said, arise, my son, and pray whatsoever you will, and it shall be done according to your word. And all the Irkadeshi will obey you. Rivers will obey you. The clouds and the wind will obey you. The mountains will heed your words. And when the house of Israel shall behold all these things, surely they will give heed unto your words. For you are called and have been ordained after the order of Melchizedek, and I am your God. And this day know that I will go before you. This day is the beginning of the time of decision for the house of Israel.